Living in Virginia, you're in the fast lane on the information superhighway. We've invested $3 billion in Virginia's broadband network to give you one of the fastest internet connection speeds in the world, so you can build relationships, bring new business to our state, and meet the future of education. It's amazing what we can do together. Visit VCTA.com to learn how broadband connects the Commonwealth.
From the General Assembly and the City of Richmond, I'm Woody Evans for Cable Reports, brought to you by the VCTA Broadband Association, connecting Virginians to their government. We're pleased to have Brian Moran with us this morning, Secretary of Public Safety and Homeland Security. Welcome, sir.
Well, thank you for having me, Woody.
That's a lot under your control. Tell us about it.
We have 10 agencies, very important agencies in public safety, as well as the Homeland Security Division. So we work closely with the National Department of Homeland Security around issues like cybersecurity, election security, unmanned aerial vehicles, unmanned aerial systems, drones. I mean, there's a variety of issues, obviously terrorism. So we have that Homeland Security division, and then FEMA as well, Federal Emergency Management Association, and natural disasters. But then all of the public safety agencies, which your viewers are familiar with, like the state police, the Department of Corrections, and other agencies. So a lot of work, a lot of issues. Certainly this legislative session, there are a number of issues that are percolating, and we're working on.
Of course, your background and experience lends itself to what's going on. Now, I know you were a local prosecutor in Arlington. You spent about 13 years in the House of Delegates before you were appointed to this position in the McAuliffe administration, I believe.
That's right, yeah. I was just calculating, Woody. This is my 20th legislative session in one role or another. 13 years as a legislator. I served on the Courts of Justice Committee. I was a member of the State Crime Commission. And then a practicing lawyer after my days as a prosecutor. And then now this is my 7th legislative session as a secretary. So to have some experience at it now. Of course, every session is a little different. Number of the members are the same, but we've had a huge turnover. Your listeners would be interested in, I was looking at, because a lot of new faces out there, particularly this year and last, the 17 election and the 19 election ushered in a lot of new freshmen. And since just 5 years now, I think it's over 50% turnover in the House of Delegates.
50%.
Not so much in the Senate. The 40-member Senate hasn't turned over in terms of new members as much, but the House, significant turnover, which, obviously there's some pluses. The minuses are just that, there's an acclimation period in learning the process and the committee assignments, and a whole lot of issues, Woody. You can't expect a part-time legislator to be an expert in all the issues, whether it's from education to energy to, the budget, public safety, obviously. So there is some educating, but they're obviously very committed. They ran for office. They're committed to public service. So congratulations to them.
Now, you also have the Department of Corrections under your jurisdiction. I know there's a real problem in terms of the graying of that population.
Yeah. Speaking, we're
yes.
wouldn't include us, of course, but yes, great question. Let me talk a bit about it. We have about 32,000 inmates in approximately 41 facilities, majority of whom are men, and yes, the population is getting older. One, they're serving long sentences, so they age while in prison. But also a very disturbing trend, what is, people are committing crimes at an older age. So the 50, 55, they're committing, whether it's drug offenses or sexual offenses, they're actually committing them at an older age. And so you have that influx of folks who are new prisoners, but they're at an age that's older. And what that does, of course, is as you get older, they have more health concerns. And approximately 20% of our budget now goes to health care.
20%?
20%. Inmates have a constitutional right to health care. Unlike the rest of us, they actually have a constitutional right the courts have declared, and you want to give them, obviously, good health care, and they get good health care in prison and getting older. So we have some facilities where, it's almost like a long-term care facility, and it's expensive. But you want to be humane, and so we actually the governor has we've done studies on this and thought about how do we address that, and so we put forward some proposals this legislative session to try to address that. Importance being, as long as they no longer pose a threat to society, shouldn't we consider them for parole? And so we put in what's called a geriatric bill to suggest if you're 55 years of age and have served 15 years in prison, make them eligible for parole to be at least considered, not released, but considered for parole. Because that's about the age where you start getting acute healthcare issues. And then also we put in a bill for what's called compassionate release. So if you have only 12 months to live, if two doctors say there's a terminal illness, you have up to 12 months to live, and as long as they have a home plan where they can go, and whether it's the family or someone to take care of them in their last few months, we could release them. Also, those with some permanent physical disability. For instance, we have some inmates who are in wheelchairs, and could we, as long as they don't pose a threat to society, could we release them? And as long as there's health care on the outside as well. And so we put that proposal. Both of those have passed the Virginia Senate, so we're pleased about that. I think that would help. One, it's humane, and two, it alleviates some of the health care costs that DOC is, because we have a $1.2 billion budget, and if 20% of that is going to health care, that's not going to reentry services. We're very proud of Harold Clark and all the employees at DOC. We have the lowest recidivism rate of any other state in the nation.
Wow.
Meaning folks are getting out, returning citizens, and they're staying out. We have a 23.4% rate. For 4 straight years, we have had the lowest rate. Again, 4 straight years, we have had the lowest recidivism rate in the nation. That's because we've put resources, we've put money into reentry, because we think that's an appropriate expenditure of taxpayers' money. Because when an individual gets out, they're a returning citizen, they go back to the community, you don't want them committing another crime. You don't want them victimizing another Virginia citizen. And so we're very proud of that. So I'd rather put those resources into more reentry, more education, more rehabilitation services, mental health services, substance abuse services. So when an individual gets out, they stay out. And so those are a couple of the proposals we've put forward. Also, prolong the answer, but something called Fishback versus Commonwealth issue. It applies to about 311 inmates. They were sentenced during a period of time where juries may not have known that parole was abolished. So the sentences may have been skewed to the heavier side because juries didn't, they thought there was still parole, but parole was eliminated, and as of 1996, there was no longer parole. So from 96 to 2001, juries may have been, sentencing heavy. And so always, again, not released, but considered for parole and up to the parole board. We have 5 wonderful parole board members. They can determine whether or not the person should get out, whether they continue to pose a threat to society. If not, then release. So that bill has passed both chambers, the House and the Senate, so we look forward to the Governor Northam signing that piece of legislation. Technology
is wonderful, but it also poses a lot of problems. I understand that there's an issue with unmanned vehicles, the drones being used by criminals to deliver contraband to our prisons.
Yeah, well, drones have a lot of beneficial uses. I've been an advocate of drones because one, they're cheaper. You don't have to put a helicopter in there. Helicopters are thousands of dollars per hour of flight. And also, helicopters are dangerous. I mean, Kobe Bryant, and we had lost 2 wonderful state troopers in 2017 in Charlottesville to a helicopter accident. So I'm a big fan of drones, and when used appropriately. So obviously, if you're using them to drop contraband into one of our corrections facilities, you're not using it appropriately. And so much of that, though, is regulated by the Federal Aviation Association. So they regulate the airspace. So there's actually very little the state or locality can do with respect to regulating the airspace.
What about keeping people out of jails and in prisons? I know there are a couple of bills dealing with that. One deals with people who can't pay their fines, for example.
Right.
And another deals with the decriminalization of marijuana, small amounts of marijuana.
Well, you've put your finger on 2 really important pieces of legislation. My days back as a prosecutor, you'd see individuals who couldn't afford to pay their fines and costs. They've got stopped for a minor traffic infraction, red light, maybe speeding. They don't have the money to pay the speeding ticket. So in 30 days, in those days, you'd get your license suspended unless you paid it. Then they have a license that's suspended, but they have a job, they have family errands to run, so they keep driving. And then they get stopped again. And the police officer rightly says, well, you're driving on a suspended license, that's a jailable offense. They take them down, take them downtown, they take them to the station, they get arrested, and all of a sudden you start creating a criminal record. You spend a couple of days in jail, you might lose your job. Then you fall behind in your rent because you don't have a job anymore and you get evicted. I mean, it's a vicious cycle of consequences. And for 20 years, been working on this issue. We made a favorable, just enter a plan of payment so that you can at least pay something per month toward and not lose your license. So we kept going through, but we had literally 600,000 people are suspended in Virginia for failure to pay fines and costs.
That many?
They're not criminals that are not paying their fines, it's 600,000. Well, a lot of them are out of state now, but still, you're talking a couple of hundred, maybe 300,000 in state. So Governor Northam, to his credit, put money in the budget to say, you know what? You're no longer responsible for your reinstatement fees. You're no longer responsible for your fines and costs. You're going to get your license. Well, if you get a ticket, you're supposed to pay your fines and costs, but we're no longer going to suspend your driver's license. There's other ways to collect the fines. Commonwealth's attorneys, prosecutors can file a debt collection. But we're no longer going to suspend your driver's license. And that was a huge thing. Last year, the governor put it in the budget. This year, we're codifying it, meaning it's going to become law of Virginia, so it doesn't rely on the budget, doesn't rely on which governor it is. It'll be, that will be permanent. The second effort you mentioned was marijuana. Oh, let me get another driver's license bill we have going through is for non-moving violations. When someone gets convicted of a drug offense in Virginia, you lose your license for 6 months. Even though it had nothing to do with, you weren't driving at the time you were busted for, cocaine possession or heroin possession. You were nowhere near your automobile, but you got your license suspended. Well, without your license, you can't go to NA, you can't go to AA. Probation, parole becomes very difficult unless you live downtown and you have access to public transportation. You're going to miss appointments. And we want people back. We want them making their appointments, substance abuse treatment. We want them getting back into the workforce. So we have a bill that says no driving license suspension for those crimes. And that bill's moving through the House and the Senate. We're very excited about that. So that's big, keeping people out of the criminal justice system. Second one is marijuana decriminalization. We had 29,000 marijuana arrests last year. It's the most significant or largest drug arrest for any drug. And there's a lot of interest now in legalization. A number of our sister states have legalized marijuana. And so, you think, wow, there's 29,000 people getting arrested. Yet other states, depending on where you live, you can smoke it legally. So there's this real dichotomy that, and so this year the governor ran on it back in 2017, said I'm for decriminalization. And this year, with a Democratic majority, it looks like we're going to get there. It's just a matter of some of the details. But you know, it's decriminalization, so you take it out of the criminal justice system. And then ultimately there'll be a study, should we go to legalization? You know, let's study it. I've been to Colorado, I visited Colorado to find out how they did legalization. There's a lot of issues. You know, who grows it, who distributes it, how much, what about edibles? I mean, some of these, and what about kids? You know, and so there's a variety of issues around legalization, the regulation, the taxation, and so that all needs to be studied in a thoughtful way. So we'll, I think a study will pass this year. Some version of decriminalization will pass this year, and that'll give us time to study.
And that'll have a big impact in terms of reducing costs in the criminal justice system.
It should. You know, this year the governor put money in for public defenders, which is huge. I mean, our criminal justice system is based on an adversarial system. You have prosecutors, you have public defenders or defense attorney. They both have to be competent, you know, because you know the poor defendant, you know, without competent counsel is going to get railroaded. So the governor put more money in for public defenders, put more money in for prosecutors, and so that's really important to the criminal justice system. And so, but you take out 29,000 arrests for marijuana out of the system, yeah, there's going to be substantial cost savings in our criminal justice system.
Yeah,
I focus on those crimes that are, you know, there's a victim, there's violent crime. I think that's how most Virginians feel.
Yeah, I believe for the first time, excuse me, there's going to be a public defender's office in Prince William County.
Right. Having been up in Northern Virginia, big fan and back of public defenders. You know, when I was actually in Arlington and I was actually an Alexandria representative, I sponsored legislation to create a public defender's office in Arlington. We had one in Alexandria, and court-appointed attorneys are good. I was on the court-appointed list. I used to do it for juveniles. You got $100. I mean, I didn't do it, you know, nobody's on the court-appointed list for the money.
Right.
You do it because I think every lawyer should do some pro bono service. I remember the first case, I got out of the prosecutor's office, Woody, and you know, I knew the judges, and the first case I got appointed to was a murder case.
Oh my God.
I'm like, really? A murder case?
Right.
I think I got just preparation, never mind the trial itself. I mean, I got a kid's fate in my hands. I think I got granted about $450. I mean, you know, you don't even want to think about what you're getting paid because it's nothing compared to the hours. But anyway, public defender's offices, they're full-time people. They have an investigator. You know, they're well-trained attorneys. And so, you know, I'm a big supporter. And the governor put money in his budget, so he recognizes that as well, and he's funded it. To his credit, yeah.
You talked a little bit about the partnership you have with federal Homeland Security. I take it that the biggest threat happens when we have a hurricane, for example, those kinds of things. Talk to us about what your agency does in that regard.
Yeah, well, this is something the governor very interested in Eastern Shore. Grew up on the Eastern Shore and lived in Norfolk now, and so. You know, the Hampton Roads region in particular is subject to hurricanes, and you know, I got 2 more years as secretary, and so that's 2 more hurricane seasons. It's from June 1 to November 30th, and so you know, typically it's around that August time frame, August, beginning of September, where you see the storms coming off. You know, they come off the desert in Africa, come across the Atlantic, and head up our coast, and Florence was a real threat. I mean, Florence, that was coming right at us. And the Governor Northam, was very, very cute. He said, you know, if you're in the eye of the storm 5 days in advance, great, because it never goes the way it says. And he was absolutely correct. We were right in it, you know, right up until about 48 hours, till all of a sudden it started to turn. And it took the craziest turn. I mean, it looked like one of my golf shots. I mean, it just went totally in the went off into the woods, but it went over North Carolina, and then it went up the Shenandoah Valley. So it totally banged left and then north, but the valley, you know, it's a statewide event because you get flooding You know, in the mountains of Southwest Virginia and Central Virginia, you get flooding, which can cause loss of property or even death. And so I would give credit, the Virginia Department of Emergency Management has put forward a really comprehensive plan to prepare for hurricanes and any natural disasters for that part. It's a multi-hazard approach, but multi-agency as well, multidisciplinary, local, state, FEMA, the federal agency is very helpful. A lot of training is involved, and local emergency managers. It's one of those things you try to do your best, but you know, these storms are getting more frequent and they're getting more severe. So it's a real threat. It concerns us. It keeps us up at night in the fall.
Yeah, you mentioned flooding, and of course, that's the real impact of these hurricanes. And we're having sea level rise without hurricanes in the area you mentioned. How big a concern is that? It's a public safety issue in those tunnels and bridges. Yeah. It's a national security issue because you've got the Navy down there as well.
Absolutely right. No, it is. And the governor appointed a full-time I served as the chief resilience officer under McAuliffe, and you know the need just continues to get bigger and bigger. And he did that, I think, in my case, because of the public safety concerns. You know, we do have a lot of public safety concerns about resilience. And Governor Northam appointed Admiral Phillips, who does all the resilience now. And that's, again, a multi-agency approach because it's all of our federal partners with the Norfolk Naval Yard, at ports of shipbuilding, at Newport News, Portsmouth Coast Guard, and then, of course, those neighborhoods in Norfolk that flood out. I mean, you try to drive through Norfolk, and even in a rainstorm, and there were flooded streets. So it's a major undertaking, and yeah, I mean, we really need to come to grips with that. And it is, and in a hurricane, you're right, it's not necessarily the wind that kills people, it's the flooding. People try to drive through flooded roads, and that I'm glad you made that point. It's the water, it's the flooding that kills.
And of course, you've got a big investment down there in the Port of Virginia that is a huge economic driver for the Commonwealth.
Yeah, and only getting bigger.
Yes.
The governor mentioned the windmills are going to be constructed there, so that's huge economic engine. We're really excited about that.
In the cybersecurity arena, what kinds of things are you being challenged with now?
Everyone listening to your show and watching it has been hacked, right? I mean, you get those things on your phone, don't click on them. I mean, just what we call personal hygiene. If you don't recognize if it looks a little funny, don't click, because that gets into your system. You were constantly barraged with cyber attacks, and the state system is constantly barraged. I mean, it's like 1 million a day. It's something crazy that, and there are all sorts of different actors. It could be somebody out in Iowa in their basement, or it could be the foreign government. They're trying to get intellectual secrets. They're trying to get into our systems. They're penetrating. It's constant. So, firewalls and cyber protection is paramount for any state government, but also private industry. A lot of our critical infrastructure is privately owned. Our financial systems, our energy, Dominion, Appalachian Power, our energy grid, privately owned. So we have to develop really good relationships with private industry so that they have the necessary cyber protections as well. I'll tell you, there's a couple of things we've done in the state that we're real proud of in cyber. One of which is the National Guard has really taken up the lead on some of our cybersecurity. We rely on them. We have a program where National Guard Cyber Group will go to a locality and do an assessment. And we've done over a dozen, and it's a win-win because those National Guard, they're our neighbors. They're learning more about systems, which is great for them, great for workforce development, great for job growth. In addition, the locality benefits. They're getting a free assessment. That's something the state has paid for. It's not a lot of money. It's $100,000. It was started under McAuliffe, and it's continued, and so it's a small investment. And it's a real win-win. Also in elections, obviously we have an election every year in Virginia, so really important, election security. And we have a wonderful Board of Elections and Elections Department. They're working with our Guard, working with our state police, making sure that the election system is impenetrable from cyber attacks.
You've also been very active in the area of school security.
Yeah. Well, you know, how many times do we read about a tragedy? Certainly after Parkland, but you know, Newtown before that, Columbine before that. I mean, it's just horrible tragedies when you see kids killed, and of course Virginia Tech, right here in Virginia. I'd say Virginia did a lot after Virginia Tech, a lot around threat assessments. We're the only state in the nation that had mandatory threat assessments, both higher education as well as schools. So just meaning develop a team at each school so that, you know, if there is a kid that's behaving in a manner that might give you suspicion about some sort of a threat, somebody intervenes. I mean, we're all about prevention. You know, let's get the kid some help if he's depressed or having something going on. Let's get him some help before, you know, there's some violent, you know, he acts out in a violent way. So we've done a lot around. We have a school safety center at the Department of Criminal Justice Services, which is one of my agencies, and a woman by the name of Donna Michaelis runs it. But the governor put $3 million into that last year. That passed bipartisan support at that time. Republican leadership endorsed it. So we're giving her the resources so she really can penetrate with training and school resource officer training, and you know, all the necessary you know, active shooter drills around the state, both elementary and high school. So yes, Virginia's done a lot. I'd like to think we're a leader in the school safety area.
Got about a minute and a half left.
Oh, we haven't even talked about all of our gun safety bills.
I know, and I wanted to talk about for sure the red flag legislation.
Yeah.
A lot of people complain about it being unconstitutional, but I understand a number of states.
17 states have it. It's been tested. You know, we're in the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals. It's been tested in the Court of Appeals, and it was a recommendation from the Trump School Safety Commission. Bill Barr, the United States Attorney General, said, he endorsed red flag law. Background checks has passed. Actually, 7 of the governor's 8 bills have passed the House of Delegates, so we're really proud of that activity. And again, they're all constitutional. No one's gun's going to be confiscated. We're trying to keep guns out of the hands of those who are dangerous to themselves or others. And so this follows along what's always been said, and obviously the election in November generated more Democrats who support this, and so the bills are moving along, and we're very pleased with that. And we're trying to do our best to accommodate those, the opposition to, red flag law in particular. The due process in that is more than someone might even get for an arrest warrant, where you take the person into custody. Mm-hmm. This is the firearm that's being taken temporarily up to 14 days. So we've heard a lot of, I know there's a lot of anxiety around the Commonwealth, and we're doing our best to address their concerns and address some of the misinformation. There's a lot of misinformation out there about it. And so, I hope your viewers take some time. There's 7 good bills. Go to the website. We're happy to provide any information with respect to that legislation.
Great. Thank you for being with us, Brian Moran. Good to see you. Good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching Cable Reports, brought to you by the VCTA Broadband Association. Until next time, I am Woody Evans.
Mm-hmm.